Hi, Matt Landsman, Landsman Law. I wanted to talk to everybody about and give them more information about violations of probation, which is a common problem here in Florida. People are on probation, they don't know their rights, they don't know what happens with a violation of probation hearing or violation of probation allegation, and I want to give you an overview of it. So the first thing to know about violations of probation in Florida is that when you're on probation, you're actually having you're kind of taking part of a continued sentencing proceeding. So it's kind of like you either entered a plea or went to trial and you got sentenced, so you got put on probation, which is kind of like a, a grace period to show the judge that you don't deserve to get some sort of harsh punitive sentence. So your sentence is kind of open and continuing for this time period. What that means practically is that your behavior during this time period is subject to kind of review at any time because of uh, this monitoring by your probation officer and then ultimately by a court. But you're entitled to certain rights in the process. But the conclusion is, if you're violated on probation, you can still get up to the maximum possible sentence for the original charge that you're on probation for. So if somebody says, well, I'm on probation for robbery, which is a second degree felony, where you can get up to 15 years in prison, simple robbery, that is, and you violate probation with testing positive for marijuana, for example, and then you end up getting 15 years in prison for violating probation. The concept of saying, "Well, got 15 years in prison for violating probation for marijuana," or I went to 15 years in prison for marijuana is wrong. You got sentenced to 15 years in prison for robbery because the judge felt that, for example, your behavior wasn't good enough because you were using marijuana while in this period of grace, which would have been probation. So that's just an example. But things like that do happen, which are tragic. But basically, that's the first thing: is that if you're on probation for whatever it is, a misdemeanor, felony of any kind, you need to know what kind of charge you're on probation for, because that's going to tell you what kind of punishment you could get if you're found in violation. So, second thing to know is that violations can be either technical or substantive. What that means, a technical violation would be like I tested positive for a drug, or I didn't check in when I was supposed to, I was out of place. Those are considered technical violations, like somebody's violating the rules of probation. And a technical violation, it sounds like it's really not that serious, but some technical violations are more serious than substantive violations. So a substantive violation is like committing a new crime while you're on probation. So people talk about they can be a technical or substantive violation. So, for example, there are circumstances when being accused of and even committing some low level crimes on probation may not be treated as harshly as some technical violations when that technical violation undermines the concept of probation itself. So, for example, um, called absconding, like not showing up at all, is a very serious violation. And if you get accused of something like absconding, like not reporting, that can be a real big deal. And you're going to want to get somebody who really knows what they're doing to try to help defend you from something like that. But there's all kinds. But they're all very case specific. But you need to know there's technical and substantive violations, and just being called a technical or just being called a substantive violation isn't going to help tell you what's going to happen or what you should try to do about it. Uh, the third thing to know about violations of probation is that they're heavily controlled by statute and the criminal punishment code. So the statute 948.06, it's kind of like the statute in Florida that governs violations of probation, and there's a lot of provisions to it, and there's a lot of sentencing things, and having to do with how the probation should be operated and how violations should be conducted. It also helps tell you about possible sentencing structure if you're found in violation. The criminal punishment code, or the CPC, that's going to be important to you if it's a felony violation of probation. And that's important because you're technically still part of this sentencing procedure. So knowing the rules of the criminal punishment code are crucial for knowing what possible sentences you could get and what your concerns should be going into a violation of probation. And lastly, it's also important to know about violations of probation. You really need to know about this concept of what a hearing is and what it's like. So at a violation of probation hearing, let me start with that. Just because you've gotten violated on your probation doesn't mean you are going to be found in violation. So some people make the mistake of saying, well, I was arrested, therefore I'm in violation of my probation, or I violated my probation because I was arrested or because I had contact with law enforcement. But this is incorrect. Basically, arrest or contact with law enforcement may be something you have to report to your probation officer, and it may cause them to file a violation of probation affidavit against you, but that's not a foregone conclusion. Just because you had a violation of probation filed against you, it's kind of like an allegation being filed against you. It still has to be proven in court. You either admit it to the judge that, yes, I did those things, or you deny it. All right. So if and if it's denied, you end up going to a hearing where the state has to prove that you violated probation by a preponderance of the evidence, which is like more likely than not. And at that hearing, you can call witnesses, the state can call witnesses, things like that, and you have a full proceeding where the judge is going to have to decide, is there sufficient evidence to find you in violation? Now, during this hearing, you can still present evidence, witnesses, and mitigation. So, for example, if you're accused of battery while you're on probation and you get arrested for it, but you have a self-defense claim, or the evidence you believe I was acting in self-defense, you can still present those defenses and issues to the judge at a violation of probation hearing, and the judge may agree that you were acting in self-defense, or that your defense is viable, or the evidence is insufficient to prove that you violated probation to a preponderance of evidence because of an evidence failure or because of defenses that you have shown. So that's kind of the overview of violations of probation. And you also can present mitigation to the judge. And you're going to want to have an attorney who knows what they're doing to help know what kind of mitigation the judge is going to care about, and how to get it, and what to present. So that's should cover everything about violations of probation in the most simplified way I could explain. For more information, you can contact me, Matt Landsman, Landsman Law.